welcome everybody to another fantastic episode of the podcast by the Sons of Technology. Today we have a really great episode for you talking about teachers in the movies or on TV shows or the different types of movies that are out there that dictate or talk about education. But before that, and before we introduce ourselves, we want to acknowledge that we are recording this on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Kyle, what are your thoughts on this? What were you doing that morning? How did you find out the tragedy, the terror attack had happened? And just a little bit of, what was that day like for you and what does it mean to you?
Well, first of all, I cannot even begin to believe it's been 20 years already. And I was talking with my brother, my roommate from college at the time this morning. We were texting back and forth about the day and whatever, and we both agreed that we can remember that day play by play. We can go through the entire day from the moment we woke up to the time we went to bed and give you the whole entire day, but we can't remember what we had for breakfast yesterday. And that's the kind of impact it had. And then, I mean, we could do an entire episode on the impact of what it meant at the time in regards to what patriotism was, the war on terror, and the consequences of the war on terror ever since. And then other aspects like things like the Patriot Act that were passed and so on and so forth. But that's something for another time and another day. But I mean, just the impact of 9/11, like I said, I still remember it minute by minute from that day. And even in the couple days afterward. And it's just, I was in college. I was a custodian in the dorms and I had a 10 o'clock class. So from 8 o'clock until about 9:45 most mornings I worked, and I had a coworker that was notorious for just like going back to his dorm room and going back to bed instead of actually working. And that morning he come out of the TV room that was in the dorms, said something about the World Trade Center being on fire. And frankly, I was just kind of annoyed. And I'm like, no, dude, just get back to work. And then my boss came out of that same TV room about 10 minutes later and he goes, you need to come check this out. I'm like, what are you going to say? The World Trade Center is on fire too? And that's when I walked in right as the second plane was hitting the tower. And I felt pretty awful for doubting what my coworker had said. But at the same time, though, he was notorious for getting out of doing work. And then from there, just everything throughout that day, it was just absolutely crazy. How about you?
Yeah, it was pretty nuts. I was, I believe, either a freshman or sophomore in college as well. And my TV was my alarm. Right, my TV would turn on, and I always had it on Good Morning America just to see what the news was, but in a fun and entertaining way. And I wake up to this commotion and the planes, just the repeat of the planes hitting the tower. I'm like, what is going on? And my mom comes in and says, "You watching this?" I go, "It's nuts." And I didn't know how to process it. I'm like, this has got to be like a movie or something. What is going on here? And the only thing I could do is get up and go for a run. I just had to go run. And then went to my classes, and everybody's mood was just like, why are we even here? Why are we even attempting to go to classes? And we basically didn't go to classes the rest of the day. And I was a football coach at a junior high. And we canceled practice, and we ended up canceling the game that weekend as well. As I also believe NFL canceled their games and colleges canceled their games. And all the airplanes were grounded. We live, near the Fresno airport is, relatively close considering, and there's no planes in the air for a week. That was kind of eerie, knowing there was nothing like that in the sky. It was just a very ominous time.
Yeah, I played football in college at the time. We were Division II. We actually did play that week, and most Division I schools did take that week off, I remember. But it was the atmosphere of the stadium. We played in this dome when I was in college, and the atmosphere of the dome, it was so quiet, even though there was like 4,000 or 5,000 people in there. It was just so quiet. Even when we were doing good things, like we ended up winning that game, if I remember. I don't remember the score or anything. I do remember we played Hillsdale College. So fellow EdTech Army Andy Losick, alum of Hillsdale College, played football there too. We were at different times. He was a few years ahead of me, but it just eerie and weird. And then you mentioned the planes. The town where I went to college was the former K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base is there. And that was one of the main bases where B-52 bombers during the Cold War would take off loaded with nuclear warheads. And they would basically circle the North Pole 24 hours a day in case there was ever an attack. That way they were at the ready to just go fly over Russia and do what they had to do. So the town itself was used to seeing those big planes in the years previous to this. The K.I. Sawyer shut down in 1995, but all of a sudden planes were getting grounded on that day. And we had these massive 747s that were landing there when most of the time just the little airport that's there, which is, I think, the only flights even to this day that go out of Marquette, Michigan, go to either Detroit, Chicago, or Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so it's just like these little puddle jumpers, you could say. All of a sudden now there's like 737s and 747s on the ground there. And yeah, it was nuts seeing that. But, like I said, we could spend an entire episode just talking about what we were doing that day, let alone the impact of 9/11. But we do got a really fun episode for you here today, a little lighthearted, different from what we normally do. So, but let's introduce ourselves first. Joe, you usually go first, so why don't you do that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Joe Marquez. I'm an educator out of the Central Valley of California. Currently, my role is Director of Academic Innovation for Q. And if you want to connect with me, you can always find me on the Twitters at Joe Marquez70. And as always, my partner in innovation, Kyle Anderson. Kyle, please introduce yourself.
Yes, Kyle Anderson. You can find me on Twitter at Anderson EdTech. Same thing with the Instagram. I have a blog that I have been neglecting as of late. I have not been doing any writing for various reasons. I have ideas, but I don't have the motivation right now for a lot of reasons. But that's andersonedtech.net. And then I have a book titled To the Edge, Successes and Failures Through Risk Taking. You can find that on Amazon. You can find it on barnesandnoble.com. And then also through my publisher, EduMatch Publishing. So if you have not picked a copy of that up, I would love for you to do so. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, especially in a time where taking a risk and trying something new is just ever so important in the age of education that we're in right now. But I mentioned that today's episode is going to be a lot of fun. We decided this week to ask the EdTech Army, our Twitter group that we have with a handful of other innovative, like-minded educators, ask them, what do you think Joe and I should talk about this week? And one of the things that came up were teachers in movies and TV. And I thought that was an absolutely great idea. So, and then I said to you, I'm like, what do you think we should do this? And you agreed. Let's do it.
Yeah, it's very fun to do this because there's so many movies out there about education and teachers and memorable characters. And I was kind of like you for a minute, Kyle, when I was trying to think of an exact movie or exact character, and they were just getting jumbled in my mind. And so I started going online and just kind of to get my thoughts, like, okay, let me get these movies straight. And I started realizing why it was getting jumbled in my mind, because there's only a few different types of education movies that are out there, just repackaged and repurposed with new characters or new stories, right? So I want to name some of them, and I want to see if you agree with me, if I'm missing any or not. So there's the sports education movie, right, where you have a new coach coming in to lift up a team that's not done very well ever and inspire them to win the championship, right? So there's that education movie. Another take on that sports one is a new coach coming into an already successful team, but the kids are just not the best kids, and so he does things to make them into better characters, even if it's detrimental to the team itself. So there's that sports movie. In education, there's the one where you have the teacher coming from a high performing high school, going to an inner city high school where the students are not performing very, very well, and lifts them up and gets them to understand that education is key. There's that kind of movie. Then you have the movie where a teacher comes in and just does things out of left field to bring new life into the classroom and doesn't play by the rules and kind of mixes things up. Those are the ones that I really really like. And then finally, there's the one where the teacher just doesn't really like their job and is down on their luck and is like, what am I doing? And ultimately realizes teaching's the best thing because of all the kids and changes he's made over their career. So those are the 5 different education type movies or tropes that I can remember. Am I missing any, or am I off the mark there?
The only one I would add is maybe the one kind of going with the sports theme one where you've got the win at all costs kind of coach or whatever that is more of the bad kind of deal instead of because instantly when you said the one that the coach that comes in and even if it's at the detriment of the team to make people better characters or whatever, instantly I thought of Coach Carter when you said that one. But the one that I thought of as the opposite to that was Varsity Blues, where you had the coach that, kid clearly has a concussion, but he keeps on making a play. The kid blows his knee out and has all these problems with the knees, and he's getting cortisone shots before every game. And then eventually the kid completely tears his knee apart. And then in the same movie, you had another teacher that was absolutely terrible who had a side gig in a very questionable career, which you don't mix those two things. And then on top of that, you live in a tiny, small town, you're flaunting the money you're making in that side gig. So that was, there was 2 very poor examples of teachers in that movie. But I was thinking about this when we agreed that we were going to do this, where I wanted to not necessarily take movies where there was just a small part where it was a teacher, because another small part one is Bradley Cooper's character on The Hangover, where he's a teacher and basically tells a kid, we're going to this great field trip. And then he ponies all the money the kids give him for the field trip to take to Vegas and everything. So that was just a tiny part of the movie, though. So I wanted to make sure I was thinking about teachers that were a very large part of the plot of a TV show or a movie. And I wanted to kind of mix it up a little bit and make sure I was thinking of ones that were good teachers, good examples, or ones that were very bad. And because we want to start out with the good, though, I kind of went out left field with my first thought here. And I chose a teacher from Beavis and Butthead. I know you and I, Joe, are the same age. I know you watched that show. I bet you a few of our listeners watched Beavis and Butthead back in the day. And not exactly the most wholesome of TV shows, definitely not family programming by any means. But there was a teacher that Beavis and Butthead had on that show that was, to me, a great example of a teacher in many ways. And that was Mr. Van Driesen. Do you remember Mr. Van Driesen?
Yeah, wasn't he the one that was always shaking? Like, oh, Beavis.
No, that was the coach. That you're thinking of the coach, the one that was always angry. No, Mr. Van Driesen was like the hippie teacher, the one with the glasses and the long hair.
I got it. Yeah.
But he was, and the reason why he was such a good teacher is because you had 2 knuckleheads in Beavis and Butthead that school was definitely not their thing. They just wanted to rock and roll and try to find girls and whatever. But Mr. Van Driesen was very patient with them. He never raised his voice, always was looking out for both Beavis and Butthead's best interests. And he was very innovative in some of the stuff he did too. Whereas you see other teachers that were on Beavis and Butthead, it was a lot of the whole, sit here and listen to what I'm going to teach you. Or you had the coach that he would say, sit here, listen. And then if they didn't, then he would just scream and start throwing things. Mr. Van Driesen, he had a guitar and he would circle the kids up and like teach them lessons using his guitar. So it was very outside the box what he was doing. And this is a show that was from the mid 90s or so. So like you're talking 25, almost 30 years ago is when Beavis and Butthead came out. And I really think Mr. Van Driesen was ahead of his time then. I mean, even now though, like how many teachers have their guitar in the classroom? If I knew how to play guitar, I probably would, but I do not know how. So I really, when I was thinking about like, what's a great example of a teacher in a show that I like growing up, that was one of the first ones that came to my mind.
No, I mean, that's true. I mean, patience and, being able to connect with students is extremely important, right? I was having a conversation with a few educators this morning, and one of them was just saying, like, right now, teachers are under so much stress and pressure that sometimes, they're looking at the ability of the kids at the moment and like putting the blame on the kids. Why are they so low in their abilities right now? Why is this? Why is that? And, we were talking about how teachers need to flip the script and go, like, what can I do to inspire my students? What can I do to change the way that I'm approaching this lesson so that the students become more connected to it? And it sounds like that's exactly what's happening in the example that you're giving, right? Just a different way of teaching in a fun and engaging way, right? That maybe Beavis and Butthead would have connected to, because they're rockers and they see a guitar, and that might be their gateway into, okay, I can dig this class, right?
Yeah, I mean, it never really developed into anything further where he really truly connected, but throughout the course of that series, that show, he never gave up. So, and it wasn't like, a typical sitcom where the story develops from the pilot all the way through. So, I mean, each episode of Beavis and Butthead was a little individual thing. So you never did truly see Mr. Van Driesen connect, but again, you never saw him give up on him either. And then even if you go to the movie Beavis and Butthead Do America, they storm in, the FBI storms into the classroom looking for Beavis and Butthead, and the first thing he did was, well, why are you looking for him? Do you have a warrant on this? We have a Constitution in the United States. You need to honor that. And then the FBI agents assault Mr. Van Driesen. So, I mean, even in the face of the FBI breaking in, he was standing up for them.
Yeah. No, that's a good example. I never digged that deep into that character. So I'm glad you gave us a deep dive into that. I know a lot of people are going, "Oh, Beavis and Butthead. I wasn't allowed to watch that when I was a kid. Maybe I should go back and look at it."
Now you see what kind of life I lead now. That
Plus, I think
I can analyze the character development of a character from Beavis and Butthead. Now you know what kind of mind I have.
Well, I mean, that takes a mind like that to connect, right? I actually tried to use Beavis and Butthead in my teaching when I was talking about chemistry and atoms and molecules and explosions, and the kids were like, "Who's Beavis and Butthead?" I'm like, "Oh, I have to make sure my connections are in the century that they're in, not from my."
Yeah,
century.
I remember the first time I had an issue like that. I was quoting, I think, the movie Tommy Boy, and I just got blank stares. I'm like, "Oh, that movie came out before you were born. Never mind."
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things I did when I was an 8th grade science teacher, and I would tell the students at the beginning of the year, you have to go home and ask your parents if you can watch Ferris Bueller, because I will be making lots of examples from that movie, and you're not going to know what I'm talking about unless you have that reference. So I said, that's first week of school. Go see if your parents will let you watch Ferris Bueller.
So, Joe, now I gave you an example of a teacher, so I know you've got examples as well. So let's hear one of your examples of teacher, good or bad, your choice.
Yeah, so I'm going to take this in a couple different directions. So some of them will be the actual teacher, but some of them will be the overall movie that kind of shaped me. Like, I like to watch these things before the beginning of the year to give me that inspiration and inspire me to be that kind of educator. So of course, Dead Poet Society is a great movie, and the reason, to me, it's a really good movie is because I'm not into poetry. I don't know a lot of people that are into poetry. If you are into poetry, awesome. But that wasn't myself. And in the movie, the Robin Williams character tried to find ways to connect the material to the way that these boys are feeling at that moment, to connect the material to their experiences, to their lives, to make it meaningful, to make it relevant. Not just saying this was written 100 years ago, you need to know it because it's a good poetry. It's because you're going through this right now, and let's give some examples and let's do this. And so making that connection of the material to the relevancy now is incredibly important, I think. I think one of the things that teachers fall into is when they're teaching something like math or something, and the kids go, "Why do we need to know this?" And the response is, "Well, when you get older, you're going to need this stuff." Well, the kids are like, "Well, then why don't I learn it later when I'm older?" Right? How can you connect the math to what your students are experiencing now, how they can use it now? And I think that's the importance of every subject. How can you connect it to their lives now, even if it's delving into topics you're not necessarily understanding with? For example, Kyle, I know that you're getting back into skateboarding, right? I was never a skateboarder. I don't know much about skateboarding other than playing Tony Hawk on my PS1. It was just called the PlayStation. There was no one before it when I had it. That was the gist of what I knew about skateboarding. But I knew that there were students in my class who loved skateboarding. They may not have loved science, but they loved skateboarding. And so when I'm teaching Newton's laws of cause and effect, of every action has an equal and opposite reaction, of force equals mass times acceleration, I'm teaching all these things. I made sure I played skateboarding fail videos, right? Falling off. Look at that. The faster they're going, the harder they hit. That's force equals mass times acceleration. Look at that. Every time their head hits the ground hits back. That's why the head pops back up, right? That's Newton's third law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And the kid's like, oh, I get it. Make the connection to the material. They're going to remember it, right? And so that's kind of what I always got out of Dead Poet Society, is make the connection to make them want to learn.
Yeah, my delving into skateboarding now is open up some doors with kids at school. I see them carrying a skateboard, and now I have a way to talk to them about something, and they're always blown away when some gray bearded dude starts talking about skateboarding. It's kind of funny. And then going along with the science theme, I am a prime example of an object in motion will stay in motion, ... When one day on my skateboard, I'm cruising through the parking lot. This is great, having a fun time. I don't see the giant crack in the pavement coming up. The skateboard stops, and I kept on going until I landed on hands and knees and just gross skidded myself out completely. I mean, it was awful. I was like a mile from home, so I had to skate home just gushing blood. It was not fun, but you know what? I got back on it, and I'm still doing it. So I actually went out and skated last night for a little bit. So it was finally cool enough to do so. So nope, definitely enjoy getting on that. So now this is probably blasphemy, but I'm not even sure I should admit this and publish it, but I don't think I've ever seen Dead Poet Society. I know the gist of it. I don't know if I've ever actually seen it though.
Well, that's understandable, right? Because the time that it came out and the subject matter, I didn't see it when it came out like that either. It's not like I was rushing to see it. I mean, if it was the option between watching Dead Poet Society and Mortal Kombat, I would go see Mortal Kombat. That's the mindset I was in when this movie had come out, right? But when I became a teacher, I got into this this tradition that the weekend before school started, I would play as many education movies, inspirational movies as I could before the start of the school year, just to get that joy or that optimism in my heart. And that was one of the movies that was recommended, and I'd played it. And I mean, it's not one that I would just sit back on a Friday night and watch leisurely, but in the moment of getting ready for school, that was always one of my go-tos to get my motor running, to inspire and move myself forward and think differently when I'm teaching my kids.
All right. Yeah. I mean, it's something I probably should check out, but like I said,
and there's Robin Williams in it, right?
Robin Williams. So yeah, Robin Williams is absolutely classic. If you can figure out a way to say that Robin Williams had a bad TV show or movie, I want to hear your theory behind why. So, because, no, he was just absolutely incredible. So now, I also, like I said, I've got ones on my list that I made, just a short list of examples of bad teachers too. So now, sticking with the animated theme, I had Mr. Van Driesen from Beavis and Butthead. My example of a bad teacher is Mr. Garrison from South Park. So,
okay.
No, that's Mr. Mackey. That's the counselor. So,
oh man, I'm getting all my guys mixed up.
Yeah, it's okay though. So now Mr. Garrison is their third grade teacher, and then eventually becomes their fourth grade teacher as well. But he teaches them some very inappropriate things and things that are completely off topic. He flies off the handle on the kids all the time. Now, granted, Cartman can be a bit of a tough nut to crack, and I can understand Mr. Garrison being frustrated, but he just flies off the handle on the kids all the time. Even though he does try to connect with them through Mr. Hat. So, and then eventually Mr. Stick, but he also just, like, when it comes to his grading, like somebody said, like, oh, well, this is such and such and such. He goes, oh, very, very good. A for you. But then the next kid comes in, basically does the same thing. He goes, oh, C-. So his grading is all over the place, and just not exactly a great example of what a teacher should be. So Mr. Mackey, on the other hand, balanced things out a little bit, because he seems to be pretty caring, and he's definitely quirky and does some questionable things. But I think Mr. Mackey's heart is in the right place, whereas Mr. Garrison He appears to be that typical teacher that is in it for the summers off, the quote unquote bad teacher like that. So, but that's another one though that it's still on. South Park is still going strong. But in the newest seasons, he is no longer the teacher. He is a version of the president on the newest seasons, which is really strange, but it's still hilarious. But no, it's a show I've watched from the start back in like 1997, and I still watch it. But to me, that was an easy one. That just not a good example of a good teacher.
It's funny. When we were talking about these episodes, I didn't think you'd go deep into Beavis and Butthead and South Park, but kudos to you, my friend, for doing that, because I don't think I've actually seen an episode of South Park in years, right? I was like you, I used to watch it when it first came out, like for 10 years, and then I stopped watching it.
Well, the good news for you and listeners, if you get the itch to watch some South Park, if you have HBO Max, they have every episode ever.
That is good. That is good to know. It might be something that you can binge, right? Because they're only like 20-minute episodes, right?
Yeah, no. And I still will sit down and watch episodes and still laugh. And I have my favorite episodes and whatever. I'll just go back and watch some of those every now and then and laugh as hard now as I did 20 years ago when they came out. So just to me, it's a very smart show. It's a show that the creators, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, they have just a way to address things, especially pop culture or news type things, in a way that on the surface is very offensive, but at the same time can be it's a different point of view though too. So it's, like I said, it's a show that I still enjoy. And once again, where my mind is at when I can deep dive on cartoon characters.
They are pretty good at satire. I'll tell you that. I'll give you one that I'm wishy-washy about. It's a great movie, and when you watch it as not an educator, as I did, you're like, all right, yeah, you give it to him. But then you watch it as an educator, and you're like, ooh, that administrator is just a little overbearing. He could have done this in a little different way to get his administrators on his side. But this is Lean on Me, right? Classic Morgan Freeman, Lean on Me. And I always get, and because I'm going to talk about another movie with a character's name is almost exactly the same. So Lean on Me, the administrator's name is Joe Clark. And after this one, I'm going to talk about Ron Clark, classroom teacher. But this is Joe Clark. And Joe Clark was appointed principal of this inner city high school that was not doing well at all. That had gangs and drugs and violence and things like that. And he came in to clean anything up at all costs. He would tell teachers, he would go and check their dress code. You need to get your dress code in check. If you're not looking good, these kids aren't going to respect you. And he'd go tell people that they were lazy and you're a slob and just things that you would be like, oh man, it's abrasive. But as a non-teacher watching that, you're like, yeah, you give it to him, Joe. You give it to him. You tell them how to clean that place up. But then when I watch it again, I'm like, sometimes if an administrator came to me and said it like that, or it was doing these things without having like talks, that could be a very abrasive environment. And some of the teachers quit. Some of the teachers were fired. So that's why, like, I have a fond memory of this movie, especially the song Lean on Me. But then when I watch it again, I'm like, oh, it's as a teacher, I'm like, I don't know if that's the best way to come in and make those changes. So have you seen Lean on Me, Kyle?
That's one that I have not seen in a really long time. And I mean, to the point where what you're talking about right now, I don't even remember it. So, cause it's been so long. So it's one that I would have to go back and watch again. So, and I would probably be in the same kind of mindset as you, because when I did see it, I don't think I was a teacher at that point. So I probably wouldn't, I would be looking at it through a different lens now than I did back then. And especially because over time, things have shifted where now, like, you used to have the quote unquote hard ass boss, whatever, in any industry, including schools. And that was acceptable. But now, like, that's not something that's nearly as accepted nowadays, because we need to approach things with a little bit more grace and love versus And we always should have been doing that, but it just wasn't the case back in the day. So now, like, looking at it now through the lens of being a teacher for 17 years and the society we live in now, I probably would be very critical of that as well, just like you're talking about.
Yeah, the one of the scenes that always just resonates with me is that to prevent the drug dealers from coming on campus, they would chain every door shut. They would go and chain every door shut. And then the fire marshals came in and said, you can't do that. And so what they started doing is, as soon as they knew a fire marshal was coming, there was a team that would go and unlock the doors and stuff. Like, well, maybe we got to think about this for a minute, because what if there is an actual emergency and these kids need to get out, right? We got to think. So I have fond memories of the movie, but when you watch it again as an educator, you have a little bit of, there are some decisions there that probably could have been done a different way.
Yeah, you talk about chains on the doors, and my mind instantly went to the Triangle Shirtwaist fire back in the early 1900s, where hundreds of girls died in a factory fire because the bosses didn't want them sneaking out and missing work and whatever. So they chained all the doors shut. So when the fire broke out, they basically all were trapped. So that's instantly what came to my mind there. So, but now, moving on to another example of a movie, a teacher that I have fond memories of, and I introduced my kids to this character, and they absolutely love this movie now too, is Dewey Finn. And Dewey Finn is the teacher played by Jack Black on the movie School of Rock. Now, he wasn't a teacher per se. So now, if you're listening now and you've never seen School of Rock, spoiler alert, it came out in 2003. You should see it by now. So, but Dewey is in a rock band, and he gets fired from his band for being too over the top. And eventually what ends up happening is he becomes a substitute teacher at this very prestigious elementary school, this private school. And he basically has to lie to get in there. He pretends to be his roommate to get in there because he needs to make some money in order to pay his rent and then eventually enter the battle of the bands after finding a new band. Well, then what he realizes once he gets in there is what great musicians a lot of the kids are. So his motives at first are, I'm going to take these kids and create a band. I'm going to go win battle of the bands. But then as time goes on, he starts to teach kids about compassion. He teaches kids about self-worth. He talks to them about all sorts of things that, like, really the social and emotional scale, that is something that, again, we should have been addressing it all along, but it's definitely something we pay more attention to now. He was doing this as their substitute teacher. So now, granted, he was sneaking behind the principal's back and wasn't teaching them anything about any of the other curriculum. It was all about the band, but he made kids realize that they're more than just academics, and that the skills that they had, that they could take that and become something else with it, and to stand up for themselves. And it was just something that I watched that movie now, and I love the message behind it. And then, of course, I introduced my kids to it, and they don't see that message. They just they like the music. So now, like, my kids both have playlists on my streaming service where they got their favorite songs, and a bunch of the songs from School of Rock are on their playlist, like Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin, and It's a Long Way to the Top If You Want to Rock and Roll by AC/DC. So that movie holds a special place in my heart for a lot of reasons, but especially because Dewey Finn, even though he was kind of a lying, conniving SOB, he ultimately does become a very good teacher to those kids.
Yeah, that does resonate with me as well, because I've always told my fellow teachers that, yeah, our job is to teach the curriculum, but it's also to teach students how to have faith in themselves, how to have confidence in themselves, how education can be fun and engaging. It doesn't have to be dry and boring. Like, if you are sitting there just giving your students a PowerPoint
is boring,
then you are just, the kids aren't going to resonate with it. Right. I always said, you don't have to be an entertainer to be a teacher. You just have to be relevant. And sometimes being relevant is incorporating fun, engaging, hands-on activities, and also activities that are not content related, to get the students to feel like they are part of a community, a learning community together. If a student is not ready to learn, it doesn't matter how good of a teacher you are. You have to get them in the mindset of wanting to learn, and then you can give the curriculum. Now, in School of Rock, he never gave the curriculum part, right? So that's the part that, it's like, well, but he gave these students confidence and maybe a reason to come to school. Maybe they didn't want to come to school and they gave them a reason, right? So as a teacher, you got to figure that out. How can you have that School of Rock mentality, but then still teach the curriculum along the way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the one scene that stands out to me the most is the young lady who talks to him after class about wanting to be one of the singers in the band. And he goes, well, we already had our tryouts for that. Why didn't you do it then? And then she sings and he goes, you're incredible. Like, why didn't you do this before? Because she was afraid to, and she was self-conscious about her size and whatever. And then he gives her this pep talk about how Aretha Franklin had a powerful voice and was a bigger woman, and how she looked past that, and now like the world worshiped her as a result, and that all you have to do is just come out of your shell and you can be the same thing. And then later on in the movie, when she does her solo at the concert, and just her voice was something that was just incredible. And then like you see the parents in the crowd who are tearing up, seeing their daughter coming out of her shell and everything. And it's just like that's a scene that really resonates with me, and why Jack Black's character Dewey Finn was so incredible in that movie.
Yeah, and if you've never seen School of Rock, people, go out and watch it. It's a really great movie. And like you said, Kyle, it's fun for the entire family, and a lot of great songs in there as well. I would say that, finding ways to get students to connect, not only with material, but with each other and with the teacher, are key components to the learning process, right? You have to make sure that the students are comfortable to learn from you. Otherwise, they're not going to. So some of my favorite education movies are where you have teachers that are bringing students from different walks of life who wouldn't normally hang out with each other. But maybe you're creating like this new team, like an esports team or some other team, and you bring them together and they work together for the common good. Like one example of that, and I'm going to get to the movie that I'm going to talk about in a minute, but one example of that is robotics teams all across the country. Robotics teams, to join a robotics team, you don't have to be into robotics, right? My wife was on a robotics team here in Clovis for Buchanan High, they're the Bird Brains. Shout out to the Bird Brains robotics team at Buchanan High School. She was the very first, what they call CEO of the robotics team. She knew nothing about robotics, but she's very good at organization. So she would be in charge of keeping the team on track, organizing when they're going to meet, organizing where they should be along the process in order to have everything done by the competition dates. And she, along the way, got to understand and appreciate the robotics team. And that is the great part, is somebody who doesn't know anything about robotics joins a team and is a very important integral part of that, right? And then makes friends along the way. So one of the movies that really resonates with me in that kind of trope is it's called Race the Sun. It's a movie from the 90s. It's got Halle Berry and Jim Belushi in this movie, and they're in Hawaii, and they want to start a solar car racing team. And you have to build it from scratch from your in your community with your kids and all these things. And then you have to race it against your local community. And then if you win, you get to go to the big race in Australia, kind of deal. And she brings together these kids that would never hang out with each other to begin with, but they learn to become a team, and they learn to put their heads together and to actually build these things. And, of course, they win their regional, then they win their state, and then they are invited to Australia to compete. And so it's just a great movie, but it's hands-on, right? It's not just teaching from a blackboard. It's hands-on, project-based learning. And when I saw this movie, I'm like, oh, that's cool. If I ever do a solar car thing, this is something cool. But then I think to myself, why does it have to end at solar cars? If you're trying to teach why can't you teach through projects? Why can't you teach through hands-on? Why can't you teach through activities or this or that? Why can't you do that, weekly with your students? And so that really inspired me to incorporate different ways of looking at a teach curriculum and having kids work together. And I know our last episode was all about collaboration. That was key. Having students work together, who may not hang out with each other outside the classroom, but can work together inside the classroom for a common goal. And so that's why that movie, Race to the Sun, was one I always showed my students to show them, hey, that's why we do hands-on stuff. That's why I put you in groups with people that you don't necessarily know, because when you do that, you create community, you get to learn new things, and you get to meet new people. And that's the way we're going to run this class. So I would always show that movie for that particular purpose.
This is the first time I've ever heard of this movie. I've never heard of that movie at all. So it's something that I'm going to have to see if I can find that somewhere now, because now I'm kind of intrigued by it. And it's not
a good
like
movie for the whole family.
Yeah. And it's not like one of those movies where like it's got like no-name actors in it or something like that. No, those are kind of big. Halle Berry and Jim Belushi are kind of big names. So I'm a little surprised that I have never heard of that movie. So now I'm going to have to check it out. And because you said it was like from the 90s, the solar car thing I'm thinking of is, remember that first solar car that kind of made it into the science magazines and the mainstream? Was that one that it kind of looked like a torpedo, and basically the entire car was a solar panel, and then to get in and out of it, people had to like physically lift the solar panels off the car or whatever. So it wasn't like, it was not practical by any means, but I mean, and that was 30 some years ago. So I don't know where we're at with solar cars now. I know electric cars have come a long way, but do we have a viable solar car still in progress at some point? I don't know. So, but I'll have to go back and see if I can find that movie now, because I kind of want to have a little nostalgia for that old torpedo bullet looking solar car.
That's exactly what it looks like, right? And one of the cool things about the movie was they actually researched insects and aerodynamics, and that's why they decided to build the shape like a beetle, because it had good aerodynamics. So you had a little bit of science and engineering and things in there as well, problem solving. So I liked it. So definitely, if you could find it, that's the big if. I don't know if it's streaming on anything, but if you could find it, definitely watch that movie.
Yeah. Well, one I know is streaming. It's one of the more popular TV shows of all time, let alone still today, that I'm going to, for my last teacher here, a teacher that's not exactly a shining example of what's good in education. And that's Heisenberg, Walter White, played by Bryan Cranston on the TV show Breaking Bad. So now, on the surface, obviously not a good teacher, because he ends up hooking up with a previous student and cooking meth and running a meth empire. So those are the obvious reasons why he is not good. So, but in the show, in the first season or two, when he's still teaching, when they show clips of him in his classroom, it's a lot of him standing behind his desk at the board, writing a handful of things on the chalkboard, talking in this low monotone, and the entire class just being absolutely put to sleep by what he's doing. And then when the bell rings, like as soon as it rings, everybody is out the door. Even when he's in the middle of a sentence, there's scenes he's in the middle of a sentence and trying to tell them that next class you're going to have a quiz, or we're going to be doing this next class, be prepared for that. And they just do not care. They just walk right out and ignore him in the process. Now, maybe I will give the benefit of the doubt that because of his lung cancer, maybe he just didn't have the energy to put into his teaching at that point. But at the same time, though, I doubt that's the case. So, because you notice as that series goes on, though, too, like he seems to have enough energy to be cooking all the meth and to fight with all the gangsters that are trying to get in on the meth empire with him. And then all of his verbal spats that he has with Jesse Pinkman, and just all the awful, horrific things that he eventually ends up doing. So the fact that, again, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched the show, he dies at the end. The way he dies has nothing to do with his cancer. It was an awful, horrific death at the end. So, but and then there's all these conspiracy theories about how he didn't actually die and that they'll eventually be able to bring back Breaking Bad. But no, he definitely died at the end. So, but again, obvious reasons why he was not a good teacher, but it's those little things you don't see a lot of in the show because the focus is not on him in the classroom. The focus is him cooking meth. But those things are obvious reasons also why Walter White was not a great teacher.
Well, I also think if you were an avid watcher of the show, you kind of see why he was that way as a teacher. He didn't want to be a teacher, right? He felt teaching was beneath him. He felt that, he was this big, bigwig in the chemistry field, and he came up with this formula, and his partner stole it and became this big billionaire, and he wasn't a part of it. And so he has this chip on his shoulder. And so as a teacher, he thinks he's better than that. And so he doesn't put everything in to his teaching. I think there's a little bit of Mr. Holland's opus in this story, right? I'm not saying Mr. Holland opus went off and became a meth cooker. But what I'm saying is in the movie, he feels that he's not making too big of a difference, or the differences that he is making, he doesn't see the bigger picture of how much difference he's making. And it's not until the end when after that long career and everybody stands up and says, you did this for me, you did that for me, you changed my life, you did this. The opus is that he realized these small things that I did, these inspirational chats that I had done, these things that these students that I inspired to become amazing adults. Teaching is not about the days. Teaching is about the changes you make and the differences you make and the inspirations you make over time that creates this great crescendo of a career, right? And I think Walter White was not seeing that he was making a difference, and he didn't see that, so he didn't put any effort into it. And I always tell teachers, teaching is not all rainbows and unicorns every single day, right? We go into teaching and we have hard days, we have hard weeks, we have hard years. It's when we look back that we realize that the difference we have made far outweighs the days that we come home defeated, right?
But if you really do think about it, this is a really morbid thing to think about. He did inspire Jesse Pinkman to become a pretty good chemist. And then the two of them paired up together. Well, they created the purest, best methamphetamine that they could possibly make and sell out in the markets around Albuquerque, New Mexico. So again, very morbid. And we are not condoning the career choice that Walter White made by any means. But I mean, ultimately, he did make that one connection with Jesse Pinkman, and it just not good.
Let's make an Elseworlds version of this, right? So an Elseworlds version where it's a different reality, and instead of calling it Breaking Bad, we can call it Breaking Bread. And he inspires Jesse Pinkman to learn the best chemistry to build the best loaf of bread, and they have a bakery that they sell the best cookies and best cakes in all of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Breaking Bread, that's the Elseworlds version of this movie I want to see, because then a great story could come from it.
Well, yes, because then they could team up with Gus Fring and sell bread and buns to the Los Pollos Hermanos restaurant chain instead of using the restaurant as a front to sell the meth and then, making all the money off of that.
See, a feel good re-imaging has just happened here on the Sons of Technology podcast. Just watch. Netflix buys everything. So watch. Breaking Bread will be on a streaming service near you in the next year.
All right. So listeners, if you just stole that, thanks a lot. You owe us a cut now, at least.
At least a slice. A slice of bread. All right.
Oh, well played.
I kind of want to give my last one for this episode. And this is a movie you may not have heard of, may not have seen, don't even know it exists. But if you have been teaching for 5 or more years, you will enjoy this movie. And it is called Chalk. And it is a mockumentary. So it's filmed in documentary style, right? Like The Office, but it's not real. And it follows a first-year teacher in a high school getting his first job. And it goes through the entire staff and interviews the entire staff. And the reason you're going to like this is because it has characters that you work with, like literal characters that you work with. The guy coming in as the new teacher is there to shake things up, and he's the new younger teacher, and he has different ideas. And then there's another teacher who used to be the new younger teacher, but he's 3 or 4 or 5 years in now. He's the most popular teacher, but now he's getting some of that popularity taken away by this new incoming teacher, and he gets this grudge on his shoulder. And then you have this other teacher that was one of the best teachers on campus who got convinced to become an administrator. And so now she's the assistant principal at the school she used to teach at. And all of her friends are like, oh, you're administration now. You're the enemy. And so she doesn't have those friends anymore. And then you have the PE teachers who are always wearing their shorts and their whistles. And just, it is a great movie because even though there are so many tropes that you know these people on your campus and you can pinpoint them and you watch it and you're just like, this was an enjoyable movie because it's like watching a day of my work.
You have to find that one. And you mentioned that, not a mockumentary style, but the movie Waiting is a very similar for restaurants instead. So when that movie came out, I was working in restaurants and I'm like, every person on this movie is somebody that I work with. So just absolutely. So no, I'm definitely gonna have to check that one out. So now I don't have any other characters or any deep dives on anything, but 2 I'm going to mention just real fast as we're starting to wrap things up. There was a series on HBO a few years ago called Vice Principals with Danny Mcbride from Eastbound and Down. Just an over-the-top, ridiculous view of being a high school administrator and then competing high school administrators at that. So that one, if you need some dark comedy in your life that's education related, check that one out. And then the other one, I've never seen an episode. I only know about it because I'm a big fan of Jonathan Torrens, who is J-Rock from Trailer Park Boys, and I listen to his podcast. But he starred in a show in Canada called Mr. D, where he is a teacher. And I've heard about this show, but I've never been able to watch it because I don't have access to Canadian Netflix. So if there's a way to somehow get onto that show, I would love to watch Mr. D because I heard that's another one that just kind of a comedy spoof of what education is, where we just need a laugh in our life every now and then. So Mr. D is another one.
I think I've heard of that one. That one's been around for a while, right?
Yeah. Yes, it's been around for a few years. I think that's actually done now. But I guess they've had several seasons of it. But again, I've never been able to see an episode because of restrictions accessing Canadian TV.
I think I borrowed a clip from that movie once to show teachers on why utilizing ed tech to collect and grade and return work was important. And one of them was these 2 teachers having an after hours drink at a local establishment. And one of the teachers, he's like, "Wait, what are you going to do this weekend?" He's like, "Oh man, I got so much work to grade." He picked up his briefcase and he's like, "Yeah, I got to go through here and I got to grade all these papers and grade all these things." And I think it's Mr. D says, I got a lot of stuff, but all I do is I find the student that has the best grade point average. Then I take what she did and then I use it as my rubric on grading everybody else. I get done super fast by doing it that way. He goes, "So I have my whole weekend free." And so I tell the teachers, I go, you can either spend your entire weekend grading the work, or you can find a way to kind of skim past the work, which is not very good, or you can easily grade as they come in while the students are working on them so that you are spreading that work out during your work day. So your time off is your time off. I go that. So that was one of my pitches of why Google Docs, instead of just, having the students type a Word document, print it, bring it to the teacher. And if you didn't do that, you get detention. Like, oh, don't even get me started about all that stuff. But that was why I was like, no, just let them turn it in through Google Classroom. It'll save you sanity.
Well, that philosophy takes grading on a curve to a different level right there. So, yeah, I can imagine that could anger a lot of kids if you say it's a curve and then that's the way you set the curve right there. So,
Yeah.
but well, Joe, this was actually a lot of fun. We took this to levels that I did not expect whatsoever, and frankly, I surprised myself a little bit with how I could deep dive on some of these characters, especially the cartoon ones. So, and then I also learned about some ones that I never heard of before. So, I thank you for that as well.
Yeah, you have some homework. You definitely got to go watch Dead Poets, and you definitely got to watch Chalk. Start with Chalk. You'll enjoy it, I promise. And Race the Sun as well. And listeners, if we missed any of your favorite educator movies, let us know. Which ones would you have, if we asked you to come on, which ones would you have talked about, your favorites and your not so favorites, and why? We would love to hear it. Just post it on the Twitters at Sons of Tech EDU, or you can just tag Kyle and myself. Our handles are right down here. Mine is at Joe Marquez 70, and you have at Anderson EdTech for Kyle. Definitely let us know what we missed and what your favorites are. And as we're closing out, I do want to remind everybody that Fall Q is fast approaching, October 23rd and 24th. It is now 100% completely virtual, and the price is a virtual low price. So if you are looking for some great PD, over 200 sessions to inspire you, which will also be recorded and available for 60 days after the event is over, just go to q.org/fall and sign up today. So, Kyle, thank you so much for sharing all these amazing characters with us. And I definitely got to go back on my HBO Max account and watch some of the newer episodes of South Park. Maybe I'll turn that into my new treadmill show once Star Trek Discovery comes to an end on my run. But do you have any final words for our listeners before we let them go off and have their great weekend?
No, like you said, I think if there's any ones that you want to share, we would love to learn about what your thoughts are on some of these and maybe discover a few more that maybe we haven't seen before. So definitely hit us up on our Twitter accounts and the Sons of Technology channel and let us know some of your favorites.
All right, so everybody have a great weekend. Go off and keep making that difference, keep inspiring, and keep getting students involved in education. Who knows? Maybe one day your story will be turned into a movie that we will review later. Thanks, everybody. Have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day.